You may lay out wool on one or both sides of your fabric. You might want to leave your edges exposed, in which case I suggest you hem them. I today am going to be laying out the wool on both sides of the fabric so that you can see all of your options. I also am going to encase my edges in wool so that I don't have to hem them. Now, as you can see, I have it laid out on the table so I can see exactly where my fabric is. The reason we do this is so that I can mark out where the edges are. The edges are marked out so that when I pick up the fabric and later on need to find out exactly where each edge is, I'll be able to see from this visual guide and take my cues from right here. This will be the edge of the fabric. So now, since I'm laying it on both sides of the fabric, we're making a sandwich, first of wool and then of fabric and then wool again. So the first thing we need to do is lay out the wool and then put the fabric and then more wool. Now that our table is marked, we need to put down our bubble wrap. My bubble wrap is taped together with duct tape already to make one big piece. However, I have it with red duct tape here, and my marking for the fabric is with blue duct tape. That way I don't get confused as to which tape line I'm following to know where my edges are. Next, we lay out the plastic wrap. In my experience, the least amount of fighting that can be done with this is if you take it directly out of the box and roll it onto your bubble wrap directly and then cut it with the scissors. And yes, I will overlap it so that I have coverage on the entire area. All laid out flat and smooth without any big wads of plastic or any arguments with the plastic wrap. Now, the reason you use plastic wrap is so that the wool does not get down into the bubbles between the bubble wrap. So you want it to stay flush right up against the fabric. I'm using 2 pieces of fabric, and I'm going to be using some quite contrasting pieces of wool so that you can see more clearly. Since I have to use 2 pieces of fabric to get the length I want, I'm going to have a seam right here, and I need to know where that seam is in a general way. I'm going to just put a little piece of tape right here so I know that I need to put wool right here. The wool is going to go under and over right on the seam so that it will join it and look like part of the pattern. So, laying down very thin pieces of your wool. Now, just seeing this much wool, you might think, oh, that's not going to do anything. But trust me, it will. Another thing to remember is if you have any fans going, including ceiling fans or anything that might kick on, like an air conditioner or heater, please turn them off, because just the slightest little puff of wind will take away all of your hard work. I forgot one time and the air conditioner kicked on and it blew away half of my table. So, because I had forgotten. So you don't want to do that. If you have to work without heat or air for a little while, it's only until we wet the fabric down, the wool and fabric down together, and then you can turn it back on again. Also, when you or anyone in the house is walking back and forth, make sure you don't walk back and forth too quickly, because that will create a breeze and also sweep away all of your wool and your hard work. next to the blue tape where I planned on having the edges. Here's the second piece, which I will lay right up next to the first. The next step is to lay down the top layer of wool. When you're happy with the top layer of wool, it's time to lay down your mesh and wet it down. Now, the difference between wet felting and this kind of felting, you will be using water that is not hot. It will be lukewarm or cool. So I've got it already prepared here, and you add your soap in and make sure that with dry hands that you can actually feel the slip. You don't want to just dump the water on like you did in wet felting. You don't want to displace your design, and you don't want to shock the fibers too much. So you have to do it in a very gentle way. So now you've got your mesh laid down. And it's time to wet the fabric very gently. And you take some with the ladle, and you lay your hand down on the fabric, and you gently ladle it over your hand so that it's ever so carefully spreading out beneath your hand and getting your fiber and your fabric wet. It will disperse as you move around, but you also don't want to leave dry spots. So try to get it wet in this method for the most part. And you can feel it soaking through beneath your hand. As you press it, the water will disperse around. So if you have a couple of dry spots, don't worry too much about it because the water will get to it eventually. Now, if you really feel you need to fuss with something and pick up the tool now and maybe readjust something, now is the time to do it. The sooner the better, before the wool starts to adhere to anything. And when you roll it, you are going to be taking everything with you. The mesh, the wool, the fabric, the plastic, and the bubble wrap. So you're going to be rolling this whole packet together as one. And you're going to be alternating sides. So if you start from this end the first time, let's start with the opposite end the second time. There's going to become a point somewhere around the middle of the process where you take back your tool and you can abandon it, and you may take the whole thing and flip it over so that the top side is facing directly down onto the bubble wrap, and you may abandon the plastic wrap as well. Now, if you're not sure when that midpoint is, just take a good look at the wool and see whether it's looking a little wrinkly and whether you've been rolling it for a good number of minutes. So now we're going to continue rolling with just the bubble wrap and the wool and silk.